Joel Osteen has endured plenty of criticism throughout his career. The toothy preacher has come under fire for everything from his physical appearance to his spiritual beliefs to his lack of theological training. Picking apart a movie with fellow cinephiles is one of life's true pleasures. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, the Houston, Texas-based pastor attracted a lot heat for allegedly not doing enough to help, like so many selfless community members actually did, becoming heroes in the process. But this preacher had already weathered plenty of controversy prior to the waters of Buffalo Bayou raising up around the southeast Texas city. Who doesn't love sitting around with friends once the credits roll, talking about laughable moments, things the director left out, and, of course, plot holes. And boy, does Hollywood provide a whole lot of plot holes to discuss. From not being quick enough to condemn some clearly objectionable behavior, to being accused of misrepresenting the basic tenets of Christianity in a variety of ways, Osteen's public image is far from that of a flawless saint. Let's take a look at what potentially lurks beneath this holy man's bright smile. Some are small, and very negligible, the sort of plot hole it's easy to imagine ignoring. Nobody's perfect, right? But some are gigantic, unforgettable, how did that ever happen plot holes that break the central concept of the movie. Those are the kind of inconsistencies fans end up dissecting for years, even decades, after the movie's debut, and sometimes, not all that politely. Plot holes are an unavoidable fact of storytelling. But it's not every day a filmmaker admits to them. That's what makes these particular plot holes so fun to talk about. Fans called creators out on them, and said creators actually confirmed them as plot holes. That doesn't just take honesty, it takes genuine guts. This is the shady side of Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen chose not to engage with neo-Nazis, though leaders of other mega-churches condemned white supremacists and racist attitudes after an August 2017 neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, VA. Left one woman dead and several others injured, Osteen kept noticeably mum. His only commentary on the incident, and on the topic as a whole, was a vague Facebook post. One of the biggest challenges we all face is getting along with people because everyone is different. We have different personalities, different temperaments. These are the cinematic plot holes that have been acknowledged by their filmmakers. Captain America shouldn't be able to summon lightning. Fans went absolutely wild when Captain America wielded Mjolnir, Thor's legendary hammer, in Avengers: Endgame. We come from different backgrounds. When somebody doesn't agree with us or not doing what we like, it's easy to get in conflict with them, to argue, to try to straighten them out, to prove our point. Apparently, Steve Rogers was feigning that he couldn't lift the hammer in Age of Ultron. Not only was this a surprise for viewers, it's part of an epic battle sequence. Cap lays Thanos out flat with a series of hammer-shield combos, some seriously cool hand-to-hand combat, and a bolt of lightning, summoned down from the sky. As awesome as that lightning attack is, it actually wasn't supposed to happen. If you know your Marvel lore, you'll remember that Mjolnir does not actually grant the power of lightning. Thor himself has the ability to manipulate lightning, he just uses the hammer to control his power. This is clearly established in Thor: Ragnarok, when Thor uses lightning without using Mjolnir. One of the writers of Endgame, Christopher Marcus, admitted this to be a plot hole in an interview with Slashfilm. No, you have to be the bigger person. Just because they're doing wrong doesn't mean you have to engage. Did Joel Osteen's church staff body slam a baby? In March 2017, Radar Online reported that Osteen and Lakewood Church were being sued by a family accusing a church staff member of body slamming its baby girl. There was certainly a debate at one point because, particularly in Ragnarok, it establishes that Thor can summon the lightning without the hammer. Marcus noted, I think Odin even says, it was never the hammer. And yet Cap summons the lightning with the hammer. You get to those things and you're like, it's too awesome not to do it. We'll talk about it later. Armageddon uses untrained astronauts. A giant asteroid speeds towards Earth, threatening to wipe out humanity. It's up to NASA to stop it, and after some conversation, the game plan is established: send people to the asteroid, drill a hole in the surface, drop a bomb in it, and blow it up. Court documents obtained by the site claim that in May 2014, a representative of the church grabbed a child safety seat housing Victoria Wedderburn, a minor, and threw the seat off the church pew. Victoria landed face first on the floor, while still strapped to the safety seat, causing serious bodily injury and extensive mental and emotional damage. Osteen's attorneys claim the incident that made the basis of this suit was caused by the actions of third parties over whom the Osteens had no control. Osteen also claimed the church and its employees he had no liability for the incident, based on the Charitable Immunity Act. The church reportedly settled with the Wedderburn family for $15,000, despite asserting it had no wrongdoing and that the claims were entirely made up. A church volunteer was accused of child abuse in February 2010. A Lakewood church volunteer in the church's special needs children's ministry, the Champions Club, was accused of inappropriate sexual conduct with a special needs child, leading to a Child Protective Services investigation into the organization, Radar Online reported. Of course, the most logical people for the job are the astronauts they've already trained and have on staff, right? Wrong. Instead of using highly skilled experts, NASA trains deep-sea oil drillers to go into space. Thus proceeds 1998's Armageddon. Which do you think is easier, training astronauts to drill, or training drillers to become astronauts? Keep in mind, you only have a few months until the asteroid hits Earth and the entire fate of humanity rests on the mission's success. We're neither astronauts nor drillers, so perhaps the intricacies are lost on us, but really, come on. Court documents obtained by Radar revealed that a female volunteer allegedly witnessed Alvaro Daniel Guzman touching the child assigned to him in an inappropriate fashion. The female volunteer reportedly told higher-ups, who advised her that she should contact Child Protective Services and report to them what she had witnessed. Guzman was subsequently dismissed from his volunteer position. By May 2011, Guzman was arrested and charged with the offense of indecency on a child, though the charges were dismissed after a grand jury failed to indict him, reported Radar Online. Doesn't it seem like NASA should have hired the drillers to teach the astronauts to drill? Ben Affleck, who plays A.J. Frost, has actually commented on this plot hole. In February 2012, Guzman sued Lakewood Church for lost wages, damage to his reputation, and anxiety, pain, and illness. He accused the church of negligence in its investigation of the indecent and claimed it failed to properly secure video that may have exonerated him. Guzman's lawsuit ended with a summary judgment in favor of Lakewood. In December 2012, a judge claimed Guzman presented no evidence. Joel Osteen is not mad at sinner homosexuals when talk show host Larry King asked Osteen about abortion and same-sex marriage in his 2005 interview. Osteen replied, "You know what, Larry? I don't go there. But he did go there in January 2011, telling Piers Morgan Tonight, I've always believed, Piers, the scripture shows that it's a sin, but I'm not one of those that are out there to bash homosexuals and tell them they're terrible people and all that." During another interview in October 2011, Morgan asked Osteen if his views on same-sex marriage and homosexuality had evolved. The preacher said his belief really never changes, and that he's not against anything, but it's based out of the scripture. Apparently, Affleck asked director Michael Bay why it was easier to train drillers to become astronauts rather than training astronauts to become drillers. Bay's response was to tell Affleck to shut up about it. Why didn't Ariel write a note in The Little Mermaid? In The Little Mermaid, Ariel, an impetuous mermaid princess, agrees to give up her voice to Ursula, the sea witch, in exchange for a human form. But there's a catch: Ariel will only be able to retain this form for 3 days. If her beloved Prince Eric does not bestow true love's kiss upon her in that time, Ariel will become Ursula's slave. Naturally, Ariel tries desperately to be kissed by Eric, a difficult task without her voice. Homosexuality is a sin. He added, "Again, I would just reiterate what I said, I'm not mad at anybody." That leads us to our glaring plot hole: why doesn't Ariel just write a note to Prince Eric? Earlier in the movie, Ariel signs her name on the contract she makes with Ursula, proving that Ariel is literate. I don't dislike anybody. CNN's Soledad O'Brien asked Osteen how he could call himself an uplifting pastor if he declares homosexuality a sin. I don't necessarily focus on that, Osteen said. I only talk about that in interviews. It seems like in Christianity we categorize sin. There is no reason Ariel wouldn't think of this in her desperate state, but the film never addresses it. The Huffington Post reached out to Tom Sito, a former Disney animator, about this very issue.
Here's what he said. I do recall soon after the film came out and was a big hit, I was with a delegation of Disney animators doing a presentation about the film to some school children. When it came time for questions, one 10-year-old tyke with blonde curls asked, if Ariel couldn't speak to tell the prince who she was, why didn't she write him a letter? The animators smiled to each other and one said, I don't think homosexuality is God's best. Hurricane Harvey was a PR disaster for Joel Osteen in August 2017. Joel Osteen faced enormous criticism for not opening his Lakewood church, which can house 16,800 people, to serve as a shelter after Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston, Texas. However, Osteen's camp insisted the controversy was a misunderstanding, claiming the church never closed its doors, and that it would be of value to the community in the aftermath of this storm. A Lakewood spokesman told CNN in a statement, "We will continue to be a distribution center." Next question. Django and Schultz cook up an unnecessary plot in Django Unchained. Django, recently freed from slavery, is on a mission to free his wife, Broomhilda. We are prepared to house people once shelters reach capacity. Osteen's reps told the press that Lakewood temporarily closed due to flooding, but first-hand reports of dry conditions in the area were picked up by TMZ and other outlets. In his defense, Osteen told Today that Lakewood was dealing with safety issues during the initial impact of the storm. The good news is, Django has a German-born friend named Schultz, eager to help. He also said the church waited until the city asked it to operate as a shelter to start doing so. The bad news is, Broomhilda's owner is a viciously cruel man named Calvin Candy, who makes slaves fight to the death for sport. I think somehow social media can be very powerful and they can create this false narrative, Osteen told The Morning Show. Joel Osteen told Harvey victims not to feel sorry for themselves in his first sermon since the Harvey floods. Via Fox News, Joel Osteen defended his church's decision not to open its doors until the internal flooding had subsided, and he told his parishioners, many of whom lost their homes, to buck up and deal with it. Had we opened the building sooner and someone got injured, or perhaps the building flooded and someone lost their lives, that would have been a very different story, Osteen said. Now I don't mind taking the heat for being precautious. But I don't want to take the heat for being foolish. This is not just an attack on me, it's an attack on what we stand for faith, for hope, for love. Later, he said, we are not going to understand everything that happens but, having a, poor old me, mentality or, look what I lost, or, why did this happen, that's just going to pull you down. Like we've been talking about all night, you just got to turn it over and say, God, you're still on the throne. Is Joel Osteen's church just a front to sell books? In January 2015, New York attorney Richard Garbarini told the National Enquirer that despite listing Lakewood Church as a nonprofit, Osteen is leveraging the church as a money-making vehicle. The church pays to air his sermons, which are just de facto infomercials to promote his books. Django and Schultz concoct a plan to infiltrate Calvin's plantation. Schultz will fake interest in buying a slave, and will request Broomhilda be thrown into the deal as well. The Lakewood Church is a shell to funnel people to his website so he can sell his books. Daniel Boroff, head of Charity Watch, concurred, telling the tabloid, a nonprofit needs to be acting in the public interest and not in the private personal business interests of Joel Osteen. The church should benefit from the royalties of these books when they are shouldering at least some of the cost of promoting them. The problem is, they could have used a million simpler plans. If it isn't getting something back, it ought to be. Really, they didn't even need a plan. They had $12,000 and could have outright purchased Broomhilda's freedom. The Huffington Post brought up this plot hole in their review of the movie. It's too much a promotional vehicle for him. Osteen and Lakewood Church denied the allegations, telling the Enquirer that Garbarini's claims were false and baseless, adding, for more than 50 years Lakewood Church has adhered to the highest standards of honesty and integrity. Joel Osteen is not heaven's doorman, okay. In a 2005 interview on Larry King Live, Osteen, who had no formal seminary training, came under fire from critics for seemingly contradicting himself. When King asked Osteen if he believed people of other faiths who don't believe in Jesus would go to heaven, Osteen offered a somewhat rambling and unclear response in which he said, "I'm very careful about saying who would and wouldn't go to heaven."
Unexpectedly, director Quentin Tarantino read the review and asked to talk with the reviewer about it. During the interview, the Post contended the ploy seems overly grandiose, which Tarantino countered, arguing, if Schultz was straight up with Calvin, how exactly would they? I believe there's what the Bible teaches, and from the Christian faith this is what I believe. Of atheists going to heaven, Osteen said he leaves it up to God to be the judge of who goes to heaven and hell, adding, I believe it's a relationship with Jesus. Get invited to Candyland? To do everything they do would be kind of dubious. This is a good point, but the Post came back with another one. Schultz, being German, could have simply been reasonably interested in Broomhilda for being an enslaved woman who speaks his language. But you know what? I'm not going to go around telling everybody else if they don't want to believe that that's going to be their choice. Osteen later published a letter on his website apologizing for perceived waffling, writing that upon review of the show transcript, he saw that he had not clearly stated that having a personal relationship with Jesus is the only way to heaven. Osteen apologized and further clarified, "It was never my desire or intention to leave any doubt as to what I believe and whom I serve. I believe with all my heart that it is only through Christ that we have hope in eternal life." Joel Osteen messed with the bull well. This is awkward. In May 2017, Osteen attended his son's graduation at the University of Texas. Even Tarantino had to admit this could work, but also that it doesn't fit Schultz's character. How did John McClane identify terrorists in Die Hard? Yippee-ki-yay, plot holes. What action lover doesn't adore Die Hard? It has great combat sequences, Bruce Willis in his element, and high rewatchability. While there, Osteen and his son posed for a photo flashing the school's signature, hook 'em horns, hand gesture, a sign meant to mimic the university's Longhorn mascot. Unfortunately, it also has a major plot hole to its celebrated name. New York cop John McClane must defeat a team of terrorists who are holding a building hostage. Halfway through the film, McClane meets the terrorist leader, Hans Gruber, who is pretending to be a hostage. Somehow, McClane pegs him as a terrorist. Unfortunately for the preacher, that led some of his followers down a dark rabbit hole. Twitter users slammed Osteen for allegedly worshipping the devil, with one user writing via the Daily Mail, the sign "Sir. I honor you, but that hand gesture sent a very bad signal, sir. Can't believe it's you." Another wrote, "Why on earth would you use a devil sign? My goodness, a thumbs up would work." Neither Joel nor his co-pastor wife, Victoria, commented on the allegations, probably because, well, they're patently ridiculous. Tyler Perry presents. Joel Osteen's not a scumbag. After coming under fire publicly, Osteen gained support from his equally shady pal Tyler Perry, who announced in a Facebook video that he donated $250,000 to the Lakewood Church. I know that there's been some controversy about Joel Osteen and him not opening doors of the church. But the movie never explains how. Let me tell you something, Joel and Victoria are amazing people. Was it his instincts as a cop? Not quite. Screenwriter Stephen E. There is no way they would lock people out of the church and not let people in for shelter, Perry said. De Souza explained what really happened. Originally, the terrorists get off the truck, the camera craned up, you saw them in a circle and Alan Rickman says, synchronize your watches. But this scene was later cut. There were some safety concerns. I spoke to them on the phone, and it all made perfect sense to me. So before you just run and judge somebody really quick, you need to know the whole circumstances. This $1 million, I'm breaking it up into quarters. I'm sending $250,000 to Lakewood to make sure that they can get all the supplies that people need. I know that they will, I know for sure that they will, because that's the kind of person he is." Joel Osteen's collab with Kanye West isn't exactly a match made in. This was supposed to explain how McClane identified the terrorists, they were all wearing the same type of watch. Unfortunately, as De Souza rightfully pointed out, without that scene, all of these moments where Bruce looks at these guys' watches makes no sense. Stan Lee's timeline is messed up in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The late Stan Lee shows up in almost every MCU movie, if only for the briefest of moments and always as an insignificant character. Well, you know Joel Osteen teamed up with Kanye West for the rapper's Sunday service program and will do more events with him in the future, but West's religious services have come under as much question, if not more, than Osteen's own work.
NPR reported that some aspects of West's Sunday service program seem more self-promotional and capitalist than pious and Christian. He is the Church. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is no exception to this rule, and yet still manages to introduce a plot hole. Stan Lee drops this curious line in the film, "At that time, I was a Federal Express man." This is a clear reference to the Stan Lee cameo in Captain America: Civil War. This callback confirms that all of Stan Lee's cameos are, in fact, one character. He is the text of the sermon. It's his songs. But if you carefully think about the timeline of Stan Lee's cameos, something doesn't add up. Captain America: Civil War takes place in 2016, and Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. He is the Worship 2 happens in 2014. He is creating a church in himself and selling it, really. Joe Tolentino, a New Yorker staff writer who attended West's Sunday service, explained on NPR's All Things Considered. Tolentino claimed that the reason West hosted Sunday service at Coachella was to sell merchandise, including $50 tube socks and a $225 sweatshirt emblazoned with "Sunday service at the Mountain." It comes down to this complicated relationship between, being a prophet or a supplicant, Tolentino said. However beneficial it may be to Osteen's congregation and West's fans, Yeezus Praise definitely helps the prosperity gospel preacher and clothing designer alike. TMZ reported that West's guest appearance on Osteen's Sunday night service at his Lakewood church in November 2019 raked in 4.17 unique viewers, a huge uptick from Osteen's usual 1.3 million. Therefore, Stan Lee in Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2 is remembering an event from the future. Director James Gunn openly admitted to this snafu, and yes, I know I made a mistake. I'll own up to my mistake because Guardians of the Galaxy 2 theoretically happens in 2014, which is before Infinity War. And Stan Lee in the movie says, "That time I was the FedEx guy," which is what he is in Civil War. I screwed up. When did Joker get his grills in Suicide Squad? This plot hole is particularly amusing, as it only exists in relation to pre-release marketing materials. Before Suicide Squad was released, director David Ayer claimed the reason Joker had grills is because Batman punched his teeth out for killing Robin. Early trailers showed them off in all their metallic glory. Alas, when fans saw the film, something didn't quite add up. At one point, a title card tells us that Harley helped Joker kill Robin, but when Joker meets Harley for the first time, he already has his grills. Trying to make this make sense isn't totally impossible, there have been quite a few Robins, after all. But come on, would Joker and Harley really be able to swan around their nightclub unbothered by Batman if they'd killed 2 Robins? On Twitter, a fan asked Ayer about this very issue. Ayer admitted it's a plot hole, but explained that the timeline was changed later after filming. Pre-release marketing makes fools of us all. The timeline in Spider-Man: Homecoming is whack. There are so many storylines in the MCU that some level of contradiction was inevitable. Still, this particular plot hole is pretty glaring. The beginning of Spider-Man: Homecoming shows the Battle of New York, which takes place in the first Avengers film. This is in 2012. After this opening, Spider-Man: Homecoming displays a title card that reads 8 years later, which, of course, would be 2020. This completely contradicts everything we know about the MCU timeline. For one thing, Infinity War takes place in 2018 and Endgame is set in 2023. Between these two films, Peter Parker is supposed to be dust, yet he's alive and well in Homecoming. On top of that, Homecoming supposedly happens just a few months after the events of Civil War, which happens in 2016. None of it makes any sense, and Marvel knows it. In an interview, MCU architect Joe Russo admitted that the time leap is a very incorrect 8 years. Additionally, Marvel released an official timeline of the events of the MCU in 2018. It simply states that Spider-Man: Homecoming takes place in 2016, contradicting the film's title card. Time travel is illogical in Looper. No matter how hard writers try, time travel still manages to create plot holes. Take Looper, which follows a guy named Joe, who works for a crime syndicate that hides their victims' bodies by sending them to different time periods. One of the rules of time travel in Looper is that past events immediately update future events. For example, if young Joe cuts his arm, then old Joe will instantly have a scar in the same location. Sounds like a cool effect with the potential for a lot of interesting situations, right? It is, but it also creates a lot of inescapable plot holes. Consider the scene in which old Joe and young Joe talk at a diner. Young Joe cuts the name Beatrix into his arm, which appears on old Joe's arm.
Beatrix happens to be the waitress at the diner they're eating at. Young Joe does this to illustrate cause and effect to old Joe, even though the ramifications would be enormous. Shouldn't that mean that old Joe has had that scar for several years now? How on earth did old Joe explain another woman's name on his arm to his wife? Director Rian Johnson simply argues that we have to let go of these inconsistencies and enjoy the movie. Even if thinking about it, it seems not logical, it still makes sense on a storytelling level. And that at the end of the day is what matters. Who killed the chauffeur in The Big Sleep? Even classic films come with their fair share of plot holes. The Big Sleep stars the suave Humphrey Bogart as a private detective investigating a disappearance. It's a thrilling, twist-filled movie with a glaringly unanswered question at the heart of it: who killed the chauffeur? The audience rightly expect this mystery, which arrives early in the film, to be solved, yet it never happens. The police seemingly forget about this poor victim altogether. To his credit, director Howard Hawks noticed this unsatisfying loose end and sent a message to the original novel's author, Raymond Chandler. Hawks wanted to know what happened to the character so he could write it into the movie. Chandler later recounted receiving this telegram. Hawks and Bogart got into an argument as to whether one of the characters was murdered or committed suicide. They sent me a wire, asking me, and damn it, I didn't know either. Of course, a movie like The Big Sleep isn't terribly concerned with narrative logic. It's all about style, classy dialogue, and smoldering performances from actors like Lauren Bacall. Still, what kind of police force forgets about an open murder investigation? The plot to The Snowman is crazy. The Snowman is, frankly, terrible. There are a lot of reasons why, but its contradictory plot is way up there in terms of importance. There isn't just one plot hole in The Snowman, there are several. Multiple subplots are introduced and never completed. For example, a sleazy industrialist named Arv Stopp becomes a person of interest. This unpleasant character is investigated, and seems to have a plot arc worth following, and then we never hear about him again. Moreover, changes from the original novel leave certain characters in the lurch. The killer in the novel, for example, kills women for cheating on their husbands due to his mother having done that herself. In the movie, however, the killer's mother was actually the mistress in her affair, and also, he kills plenty of women who didn't cheat on their husbands at all. His character is rendered senseless, and no explanation is offered. Apparently, the project was so rushed that the film was never technically completed. As director Tomas Alfredson told NRK, "We didn't get the whole story with us, and when we started cutting we discovered that a lot was missing. It's like when you're making a big jigsaw puzzle and a few pieces are missing so you don't see the whole picture."